Well, good afternoon, in some cases, good morning, as well as good evening from wherever in the world you're joining us for this Power Hour session, in which we are going to be looking at the role of cybersecurity within the board of directors. We're not just going to be looking at cybersecurity from the perspective of how should it be positioned as an agenda item at a quarterly board meeting. Instead, we're going to be taking an active insight into the role that board of directors actually have when it comes to speaking, engaging, and participating in the overall cybersecurity posture of an organization. It is quite interesting when you think about it, but in this world of socially engineered attacks, so on and so forth, with multiple different vectors, even the board of directors could become a source of vulnerability, but also a source of strength for an organization. My name is Ali Hirji, and all of you know me as the individual who works at Durham College, the guy who tweets a lot and likes all of your messages on LinkedIn. I lead the Center for Cybersecurity Innovation at Durham College, and I'm humbled to be joined today by two individuals who I am proud to be on different boards with, but also proud because I look at these two individuals as not just friends, fellow board members, but also mentors as I pay close attention to how they talk about cybersecurity and, more importantly, how they engage in the world of cyber. Before I begin, I do want to make two very important timely announcements. Firstly, we are gathered today across different spaces in Canada, but also around the world. But I, for example, as well as my two guests, are joining us from Canada today. We're joining you online, and I do believe that digital space is also Indigenous space, as our fiber optic cables, our wireless transmissions, all run across this land and across the air. I also want to make sure that I've made mention to the horrific attacks on Sunday that happened in London against the Islamic community and the Muslim community in London. This is an extremely difficult time for the community across Canada and, dare I say, across the world. And this session being hosted on Cyber Exchange is perhaps being hosted on a very diverse, multicultural, multidisciplinary environment. And I want to reassure our audience and affirm our commitment to safety and security for all. I understand this is a very difficult time, but on the Cyber Exchange community, we stay in solidarity with those who have suffered amongst the struggle, but more importantly, we also stand committed to equity and equality for all. And with that, I thank you for your time. I thank you for joining. And I'm going to dive right into this subject with individuals who have not only helped companies get to the top, but actually stay there. And how are they going to stay there with good cybersecurity postures for their board? My first guest today is Adriana Gliga. Many of you might remember her as the winner of the Women in Cybersecurity Award at the CyberX Canadian Women in Cybersecurity Conference 2021. I'm going to ask Adriana to introduce herself, the work that she does, and to break the ice or shatter the ice, I'm going to ask her to tell us one fun fact about herself. Adriana, welcome.
Thank you, Ali. Really appreciated the introduction. And I thought I would do something different today. So I'll start with the fun fact. So I grew up in a city that had a castle and a moat. And for the longest time as a child, I thought that every single child grew up in a city with a castle and a moat. But what that did for me, it made me a little bit of a history buff. I was really interested how over the history countries developed strategies when they were attacked by others. And little did I know that all this knowledge about strategies, where you put the right controls, how do you define defense in depth is going to help me in my career. And now, fast forward so many years, I joined a career in cybersecurity and privacy. And then I realized all this knowledge that I gained when I was a child in history, it proved very beneficial to me as I was looking to figure out for organizations where the risks are, where the threats are coming from, and what are the best places where they can develop strategies, not only to protect themselves, but prepare themselves for the unexpected. So I've been in cybersecurity and privacy for the better part of 20 years. And right now, I'm a partner in the cybersecurity and privacy team at MMP, and I also one of the leaders of the privacy practice nationally.
Absolutely. And I commend you for mentioning the importance of learning from our past experiences. And during this session, I'm definitely going to be poking at some experiences that you've had with board of directors and how you've helped them. A mentor of mine once said that the best people are the best learners, and leaders typically learn not just about where they're going, they learn from how they've got to where they're at. And I want to really peek into how you've come to this point where you've really been a champion of why boards need to engage in cybersecurity. So we'll come to that very shortly. Thank you, Adriana, as always, for mentioning you are a history buff, and we'll probably be quizzing you on a couple of those things as we move forward. And with that, I will take flight to the one and only, someone who's no stranger to the Power Hour, been on at least 3 of them now, backed by popular demand, Mr. John Pinard. Captain John, as we like to call you. Tell us a little bit about what you do and one fun fact that the audience should get to know about. John?
Thanks, Ali. I think, well, first of all, it's hard to follow in the footsteps of Adriana, but I will do my best. I'm going to talk a little bit, not necessarily a fun fact about me, but something a little bit interesting. And I was thinking about the event today and so on. And one of the things that I realized is through COVID, a lot of things have changed. And one of those is we do so much online and so many presentations and a perfect example, Ali, is that you and I have known each other for about 1.5 years now, and we've never physically met each other. And we've created a really good friendship between the two of us, and it's all been online. So it's an interesting world, and it's certainly changed my life, and I think has changed a lot of people's lives. And so we'll see how things go moving forward in post-COVID times. As far as myself, I am the CIO for a government regulator called Resource Productivity and Recovery Authority that we work with the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks in ensuring stakeholders are meeting their mandates to try and reduce the garbage going to landfills. So from my standpoint, I have 18-year-old twins, and it's a great opportunity for me to be able to help to change the environment in which my kids are going to grow up in. So I'm excited about the opportunity to be able to do this. And have been for the last 3.5 or 4 years now, and it's kind of led to this from starting out as a programmer and working my way through. And I won't say how many years because it'll give you something to give me a hard time about.
There's a lot to work with there when it comes to giving you a hard time, Mr. John, but we'll leave that for behind the scenes and backstage. John, as always, thank you for taking the time. And I want to dive right into the topic here because I know that this is a subject that we're bringing up for perhaps one of the first times on the Power Hour. Now, as you know, in keeping with typical Ali style, we do have a little bit of a script, but I'm going to add a little bit of my own masala to that and make it a little more different so as to keep all of us on our toes. Adriana, let's start off with you. Now, I've been a part of many boards. I've also reported to many boards as well. And I've always found that there's a little bit of nervousness when we start talking about cybersecurity. And sometimes it's almost as though we've complicated some of the simple things. We find it difficult to talk about security postures or talk about vulnerabilities. Can you talk to me a little bit about why now are you so strongly advocating for the need for different executives, for directors, for C-suite to have a strong practice and process around cybersecurity communication for the board? What's changed in the landscape, Adriana?
Well, so many have changed in the last 1.5 years, as John was saying. But I have to say that I started actually talking to the boards a couple of years ago. So it almost felt about a year ago that every week I was doing some kind of education to a board or another around cybersecurity and privacy, because for them, for the people who are on boards, cybersecurity and privacy was very alien. They didn't know how to relate to it. They never had to relate to it. Some boards, obviously, there are people with a lot of experience, so they might not have been in the business of technology, so they were afraid of it, even as we were talking about it. And also, I find that a lot of the times when updates were provided to the board, they were way too technical. So we just kind of go right past them. They couldn't relate to them. And that made it very difficult for boards for a while to kind of get their heads around it. But I think what is bringing more and more attention to the boards right now, I think it's kind of an intersection of three different things. COVID, which really accelerated the change and the expansion of the enterprise. So we all moved our offices into our homes. We all had to figure out how we are going to engage with our customers in different ways. So all of a sudden, we can control the edge of our enterprises. Then the second, and with the younger generation, I think we have a way more privacy-aware customer base today. So people understand what their privacy rights are, and they demand from organizations to ensure that their privacy is maintained. And then if we look over the last year with, as with every big change, there are always attackers behind the scenes who are trying to, take advantage of the situation. So if we look at the number of attacks and just ransomware, I think we talk every day about the new attack, but not just the ransomware, then some of the attacks that happen to disrupt our services. And we've seen what happened with the pipeline just a week ago or so. It's really disrupting everybody's life. So even those board members can see the effect on themselves. So I think that's why we started to see a lot more interest in understanding what this cybersecurity and privacy means for an organization. It could be actually, if you're doing right, it could be a competitive advantage for you. So now boards are starting to look, okay, what do we need to do? How can we educate ourselves to be able to ask the right questions of the management, and also to ensure that the operations or the guidance we are providing to these organizations makes this company a lot more secure and privacy aware going forward.
Absolutely. And I think I do want to dive a little bit more into this aspect of, the risk registers that board of directors end up looking at. And when you start forecasting into where a company is heading and how prepared they are in terms of the necessary steps that they've taken, as is typical, I sit on many boards, and one of the things that I always tell them is, look, we better patch our roofs when it's not raining. And you need to forecast what's coming. And there's a level of sharing that happens and a little forecasting that comes with cybersecurity that I think, again, impresses upon everyone the need to know how to report appropriately. One of my colleagues who sits on a board mentioned something very powerful, and I agree with this, where he said, the idea is not to inform the board about cybersecurity, but discuss it with them. And those are two very different standpoints to take. So speaking about engagement and discussing with the board, John, let's call it what it is. You've always been a proponent of the fact that you didn't have any training specifically in security. You've been an expert in the world of IT, front-end, back-end development. But it's not just about the ability. You've brought the attitude to the table, and you've understood the importance of security, and you've brought the right attitude to the table by engaging about it. Has it been a little bit of a challenge for you, without necessarily a strict cybersecurity background, to begin to raise cybersecurity issues at the level of the board? Is the level of expectation high, or has this come as a surprise to the board that you're suddenly flying the flag around or hoisting the flag around security? John?
No, I don't think it's become a sudden surprise. I think that security in general has been something that I've pushed for a long time, not only at my existing or my current organization, but at other organizations. But I think what has changed is that security used to be, somebody stole your password or they managed to get in through your firewall. That's changed dramatically now. I mean, with cybersecurity and ransomware and phishing and all of these other things that are going on, it's exponentially increased the risks that organizations face. And I came out of a board committee meeting today that we were actually talking about cybersecurity again, and it becomes, they're not grilling me on all of the details, but they want to know that as the CIO and the head of the IT group, that I'm looking after, making sure that we are concerned about it, and that we're watching for it, and that we're looking into ways. You will never eliminate it. This is risk mitigation, not risk avoidance, because you will never get rid of cybersecurity risks. There will always be people trying to hack into your systems, and people sending, these emails to try to get into your system. It's all about education and protection as much as you can, and recognizing that it's not a one and done, that this is ever changing, and it becomes, it's not a single line item on a budget for 1 year. It becomes an ongoing budget item for every year.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think one of the key things that you're referencing over here is, again, this is not something where you just have to get approval on a budget. This is not a problem or a situation where you throw finances at. This is about building process and about building teams and building those discussions. So thank you, John, for setting that perspective. Adriana,
Can I just add something?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, John actually made a very good point. So I think the boards are starting to realize that this cyber risk is business risk today.
Yep.
So that's why we have many more conversations, because finally we got to that point where it says, well, if we don't deal with this risk, it's a business risk for us. It moved away from being just a technology problem. It's a business problem now.
Absolutely. And I think I want to work with that just a little bit, because Adriana, when you were commenting a little bit at the start about your involvement with engaging the boards and some of the relevance right now, you also referenced a couple of incidents that have recently happened. Can you shed some light on some incidents in the recent past which are really emphasizing the need for boards to take a proactive stance on cybersecurity? Adriana?
Well, I guess there are quite a few incidents that happened in the past, but I don't want to talk about very specific ones, but maybe for in some cases where I was involved in the incident responses. So, for example, I was involved in a very large incident response with financial institutions in the US a couple of years ago, and we got to the response team, and everybody was just in a shock. They didn't know what they have to do, so they were not prepared to respond to an incident. So that was the first thing that you got in there. Everybody was in a panic. How do I answer now? And what they didn't realize was the lack of preparedness actually amplified that incident. So they went from losing 10 million overnight to losing 100 million over the next 2 months just to remediate and to take control of their operations back. And they went all the way to losing part of their business in the next year. So that's the path that some organizations go through by not being prepared. So now they realize, okay, so it's not just the management. So you used to have the CISO be fired if there was an incident like this. Then we started seeing CEOs losing their job. But then we started looking at the board and said, well, what did the board do? Why the organization was not prepared? So I think those are very, very good examples where the lack of understanding at the board level led to a very exponential loss within an organization.
Adriana, if we can work with that just a little bit more, because you mentioned something there that is very acutely interesting, where you asked in that particular incident response, you asked, what did the board do? If I can shift from our script just a little bit, do you think that with the changing evolution, or rather just with the evolution of cybersecurity and the new demands of cybersecurity, that there's a heavy and new expectation on board members to be fluent in cybersecurity? Is that realistic, that all board of directors are going to have a hold on cybersecurity? Is this presenting board of directors with a new responsibility that many might shy away from? Adriana?
So I don't don't think everybody has to be an expert in cybersecurity now if you're sitting on a board, because that's the whole purpose, to have the knowledge of the industry, the different areas, to help the organization, be better. But I think they need to be cyber literate. They need to understand what they should be asking of management, and they need to be able to maybe request that the presentations of how an organization is doing from a maturity of their cybersecurity program is presented to them in such a way that they can digest it. And the second part, I think boards need to start thinking to acquire those skills. So either through getting somebody on the board, especially if they are in the industry that is more exposed, that there are more threats, they should get somebody on the board who's got the knowledge of cybersecurity and can provide that guidance. Or these days, I've been an advisor to boards in a capacity of cybersecurity in the past, so they could have an advisor that provides that knowledge of cybersecurity. So I don't think they should be shying away from being on the boards. I think they should be prepared to have the knowledge, or to acquire the knowledge to be able to respond to the new demands.
Absolutely. And I think this points to a very important notion that even as board of directors are selected, as you're putting together a board for your enterprise or your organization, knowing what their strengths are and identifying those blind spots, because those ultimately can become, as Adriana mentioned, enterprise risk and business risk. I want to dive a little bit deeper into that, but I'll take flight back into the domain of Mr. Pinard and bring him back into the conversation. John, you've been a man who's very focused on not just the qualitative explanations, but quantitative, putting numbers together, showing where an organization is headed. In your reports to the board in the recent past, especially over the last year, have you been presenting any particular dashboards around cybersecurity? Have you been formulating any sort of templates specifically to support cybersecurity reporting?
Well, I can tell you that we have an enterprise risk management dashboard that we utilize when we present to the board. And we have recently, it used to have sort of data breach or data security. We've actually split out cybersecurity completely separate from that, because cyber is a different kettle of fish that you need to make sure that there is visibility on it. We're in the process of enhancing our cybersecurity awareness and systems that are in place to monitor. And the intention is that we will be providing further, I'll say, high-level information to the board. To Adriana's comment, I don't think the boards are required to be experts at cyber. I think that they need to know to ask about it. They need to potentially have done some reading so that they have at least some understanding of what the risks are. I mean, they have to understand the risks. As a board member, to me, it's just another one risk that is facing organizations that they need to be aware of. And I think that they need to be able to at least ask enough to prompt getting answers out of people, to ensure that, in our case, to ensure that my team is looking after cyber as best we can, and that we're managing that risk.
Absolutely. And I think it's become a very interesting moment, myself sitting on different boards, where someone in your situation is, help me, allow me to help you to help yourselves, in which you've got to give them certain resources and you have to empower them with what they need while looking at the organization from your lens, but also asking questions as, for lack of a better word, third-party observers into the operation. So again, very interesting comments there on how you present dashboards, how you present templates, and how you evoke the right questions. And we'll come to those templates a little bit later on. Because Adriana, and just for our audience, those who are watching, I believe there are about 60 odd viewers right now, you'll see a little ticker that's going at the bottom with lots of information bites. There's also pretty interesting reports from MNP, which keep coming on the screen on and off, but you can also find links on it on CyberX's social media. So shout out to the CyberX team for keeping things dynamic. Adriana, one of the things that, I've heard you speak about quite a bit is that when you want to address something, or you want to take a shift or change in your cybersecurity approach, the most important thing about getting started with something new is getting started. And in the report that I read about, cybersecurity and the boards, you mentioned a lot about policy and that it begins with having the right policy in place from a cybersecurity perspective. Can you comment a little bit on that and help our audience understand what were you referring to when it comes to the importance of cyber risk management beginning with policy?
So I would say you need to understand what you are protecting. Yeah. So before you, and this connecting to the board discussion as well. So to be able to identify what your risks are, you need to understand what is important to you and what you are trying to protect. And then how do you build policies within the organization to ensure that you put the right controls around that, what is important to you? And then how do you build it into a comprehensive program that looks what you can do today, what you can do tomorrow? How do you mature your organization, but how do you prepare your organization to respond? Because as John said, even if you think that you will never get a breach, you probably will, because the attacks are happening all the time. So how you respond is very important. So starting with the comprehensive governance of the organization, understanding what you're protecting, what the risks are, what are your policies, and then implementing those within the organization consistently is where you start actually building your foundation for your programs. So that's why we said we start with your policy, but don't forget what you're building the policies for.
Absolutely. And then, when you read that report a little bit on it, and thank you for sharing that. I think that report was also one of the conduits through which John got interested in this subject, and we had engaged and determined to do this Power Hour. So thank you for sharing. John, one of the questions that I just want to draw from what Adriana just mentioned, about starting with policy and making changes to policy and ensuring that cyber awareness, cybersecurity is factored in to every element of policy, you've also been working on incident response plans. In any way, have your plans factored in the board and the responsibilities of the board as you started moving forward? John?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have, because we are a government, we're not a government agency, but we work with the government. Our board is responsible for reporting to the government. They're also responsible for working with stakeholders to make them aware of things that may arise. And so when we get into incident response, it's it's not the entire board, but it is certain, like the board chair and committee chairs and so forth, that need to be involved to make sure that that all of the appropriate people within the organization, including the board, are involved and know what their tasks are as far as reporting out to make sure that that people, the proper people get informed.
Absolutely. And I think the key thing to understand here is that this is, when it comes to cybersecurity, it's something that you participate in. It's something that's active, and there are action items associated with it. A very good example that an individual recently brought up, actually in my class when we were discussing cyber risk management from an organizational perspective, is that much like if an organization goes through a natural disaster of some sorts, there are steps that have to be taken, approvals that are required to access additional budget or the reserves, et cetera. And that all should factor in to your cybersecurity incident response plan. So John, as always, spot on. And I think a whole bunch of my students at DC and York would agree with you. So John, as always, thank you. Now we've got about 25 more minutes left. And Adriana, I've got a question that's coming directly to me. And this has to do with tabletop exercises and preparations for the boards, simulations, for lack of a better word. Is that something at MNP that you're focusing on as well, to put the board of directors in the hot seat during a cyber incident? Adriana?
Yeah, definitely. And I have to say, over the years, we have seen a lot of different things running this tabletop exercises. Yep. And some of the things that I found were quite telling when we used, for example, virtual reality gaming for them to make decisions. So you put them in a situation where they are actually in the time of an incident, and then they can see firsthand how their decisions are going to influence the outcome of the attack. So that it's very powerful, especially if you allow them to be in different roles. So you put them on a CIO roles or a CEO role, and then they get to make those decisions. So I think that really talks to the board. They start to understand how what they do or what they think it's affecting the organization. But it's also creating the awareness that there are different type of attacks and they might have to do different things.
Yeah.
It's not one size fits all. So I always say to the organizations that I work with, don't treat the tabletop exercise as doing the same thing over and over. Look at new scenarios. Maybe it didn't happen to you. Maybe it happened to somebody else. Maybe it's something for the future because of the trends that are going on within the industry. But look for those places to prepare yourself rather than just learning for what already happened.
Absolutely.
Ali, if I could jump in on that as well.
No, John, you may not. Absolutely, John. The floor is yours. I was waiting for an opportunity to get you to smile again because this topic is serious for you. John, back to you.
No, I love the idea of the tabletop. It's not something that our board has done, but it's certainly something that I would like to see not only our board but the rest of our executives go through. I have, I guess I'll say, had the pleasure of living through a ransomware attack. That I would never wish that on anyone, not even you, Ali. But it is certainly an eye opener, and until you've lived through it, you have no idea. People say, "Oh yeah, well, no big deal. You just do this, and this." Yeah, put yourself in the middle of it. We used to do that with disaster recovery testing, and it's great. You get to a point where you've tested it so many times, but with cyber, there are so many different permutations and combinations of things that can go wrong and will go wrong. And the idea of putting your board members and the rest of your executives at the table to actually live through it is something that, quite frankly, I think every organization should do.
And I second that. When I look at it from a DevOps perspective, just trying to draw the parallel, because I know we have audience from a diverse group here, I'll often find situations where the developers will tell me a bug has been fixed and it's working. I'm more interested in how did you fix this? Because otherwise it looks like a Band-Aid solution. You figured it out, you've got what you had to get done, but if it happens again, you have absolutely no clue what to do. And the conversations that come out with how you respond to the incident are truly revealing of how the organization works. A crisis doesn't just expose your endpoints. It actually reveals the process that you're going through. And that's what you really need to understand in tabletop exercises. Myself having participated in a lot of them with esports cyber, the stuff that Maddie and team are doing, one of the things in those games, you really begin to question your process. You know what you need to do, but it's that process and that decision-making and how quickly that really impacts whether you've successfully responded to a scenario. Another question, Adriana, that's come in. Adriana, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to add something to that, because I think if you look at the incidents that happened in the last while and how organizations responded to them, a big part of that is how do you communicate it out? So, some organizations had big breaches and they were really good at communicating and they went over it and didn't have a big impact. And some other organizations might not have had such a big breach, but they kind of stumbled into communication. They didn't know what to communicate at what time, or they had conflicting communication. And those are the ones we will remember.
Yeah.
So it's very important to have that communication really well organized and to be on message.
Absolutely. And if we can just work with that just a little bit, Adriana. So you made a very important point about, the board's role in actively participating in the event that a breach of such nature or any cyber breach has occurred. And John emphasized the piece of context. So cybersecurity doesn't operate in a vacuum. It's always contextualized. There are other pressures. There's time. There's the mental pressure about responding. There is, for lack of a better word, an urgency to get something done because the integrity of the institution is is at risk. From an M&P perspective, do you help board of directors with putting together a communications plan, a crisis communication plan in the event that something has happened? And how do you help them stay calm and stay calm? We can all give them shirts that say, stay calm, John is in the room, John Pinard to be specific, but how do you help them stay calm from a crisis communication perspective?
No, definitely. So this is part of the preparation. So being able to prepare, having that communication templates ready to go, it's very important. Looking at, who needs to be doing what. So when it happens, you just open that manual and go at it. And every person who is in that response team know exactly what their role is. But also, so you mentioned something very, very important. So, you go through this exercise, and John mentioned going through one himself. It's stressful for the people who are linked to that organization. So the other way to get help is to get a third parties to facilitate that discussion, facilitate that process for you. So you can be the level-headed in the room who is not as, maybe the invested is not the right word, because you are invested in making sure that things are going well, but not as invested in the company as the executives who can guide you and guide your actions during an incident. And I have to say, I had many communications at Friday night when somebody called me on my phone and said, Adriana, I'm the lawyer of this organization. Do we need to communicate to whom? Yeah. So I said, well, if you haven't prepared for it and you need to figure it out right now, it's going to be difficult.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I would add to that too, Ali, that part of ensuring success and, as you put it, remaining calm is having scripts, having routine testing that you need to go through to make sure that you've tested these things. You need to make sure that everybody knows what their part is, that people know who they're supposed to communicate with, who they have to obtain information from, so that it's step by step. You can't get into this and have any need for thought, to be honest with you, right? You need to walk into this going, okay, so we've had a cyber breach. I need to do this, 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 and this. I need to call this person. Here's the bank information. Here's the lawyer's number. Here's Adriana's number at M&P. I need to call her to get her assistance. That type of thing. It all has to be scripted out so that when you leave nothing to chance when you go through this process.
Yeah, I think, when you mentioned script, something I'm allergic to, but something that's super important so that everybody, especially in a large enterprise, can stay true to. A couple of more questions, and to the folks that are sending in questions, you can drop them in the live chat, but if you feel more comfortable to send them direct message, that's perfectly fine for me as well. John, I'll give this question to you, and then we'll weave Adriana back into the conversation. And John, you've mentioned in the recent past, and I'll reword this question a bit, that you started looking at penetration testing, you started looking at application testing, SaaS-based testing, DAS-based testing, looking at dynamic testing, singular application testing. Are you factoring in the board into some of your drills? For example, to be very precise with this question, are you running, for example, phishing campaigns with the board members to see how they respond to certain things? John?
We haven't finalized that yet. Our board is a little different in the sense that they use their own emails. They don't use corporate email. Yeah. So it's a little bit tougher to manage. But yes, absolutely. My intention is, whether I can get our CEO's approval on, my intention is that everybody right on up to the chair of the board will be involved in these mock phishing attacks to see how things go, because I think they represent the organization, and as such they need to know what we're doing, and they also need to know how to protect the organization as well.
Okay. Makes sense. And I just want to work with that a little bit, Adriana, and this is another question that I'll weave into this. And this is a question on legal matters. Now, when you are putting together a board and you are starting to add some cybersecurity requirements, or you're starting to put together some needs for the board to start assessing things from a cyber perspective, are there any elements from a legal perspective that an enterprise should be aware of? Do you need to rethink some of your insurance policies? Do you need to have legal involved to draft agreements between the enterprise and the board? Is that changing in any way, or are you seeing anything there that you'd like to comment on?
No, I think for legal advice, you always should acquire legal help, and it's definitely very important in contractual negotiations. I mean, I'm an engineer, so I provide advice to my clients, but I always say, okay, so these are the things that you should think of having in your contract, but make sure that you have legal advice who can advise you on how to write them in a contract to be legally binding, obviously. So and then you mentioned insurance. So insurance could be part of a program or cybersecurity program. You just have to understand what you are buying, because more times than not, I get to review an insurance contract of one of my clients just to realize that they bought an insurance that is not really insuring for what they wanted to be insured. Yep. And they have no idea. So making sure that you review those is very important. Go ahead, John. You want to talk something?
Sorry, I was just going to say that I read an article recently that organizations need to be more and more concerned about cyber insurance, because there was this article I had read. They talked about the insurance companies lately have paid out $4 for every single dollar that they have received in policy payments in ransomware attacks and all the rest of this. So a number of insurance companies are rethinking whether they're going to stay in the cyber insurance game. And so it's a big impact on organizations. And quite frankly, one of the comments that I had made at our board meeting today was, regardless of whether you have insurance for cyber, it's the reputational risk that insurance won't cover.
Yeah.
Right. That if you're in an industry where your data is valuable, and in our case, we house data from other stakeholders, that they need to know that we're maintaining security on their data. And if you get caught with an attack, it has a huge reputational risk to the organization that even cyber insurance won't help.
John, let's work with that just a little bit more. And and I really thank you for working with each other. I've been learning so much, and just the exchanges that you've had with each other. John, one of the things that we've spoken about over the last 12 months, but even before that, as you started to bring in a bit of a cybersecurity regime into the firm and sort of getting them to do some cyber-related gymnastics, as you like to put it, and getting them to think and get more fit from a security perspective, you've needed support to get the board to listen. You've needed some support. You've needed allies within the firm. I've always said this, right? That a doubtful friend is far more dangerous than a secure enemy. And you need to have friends within the firm who are supporting you. Have you had to work with other colleagues to make sure that the board sees how wide the implications are of cybersecurity, and how difficult has it been to build the case internally before bringing it to the board? John?
I absolutely have had to work with individuals. I'm lucky enough that one of our board members is a retired CIO. So he has always been a great ally on the board. But even from an executive standpoint, working with my CEO and others to help to educate them, prior to COVID, because to me there's been a dramatic increase since COVID, but prior to COVID, my CEO really was not. He knew kind of what cyber was, but it's been a much more prevalent instance of late. And I would be very surprised if there was anybody out there that didn't know what cybersecurity risks were, at least to an extent. But it still requires a great deal of education on how does it impact me? How do I impact the organization's risk of a cyber attack? As I said, that I've lived through this, that it was an unbelievably simple process that in this organization I worked at, somebody in the accounts payable department received an email that said, please pay this invoice immediately. It's harmless. It seems straightforward. They double clicked on the attachment and it just went from there.
Yep.
And it literally takes seconds.
Interesting. Yeah, and I think that what you've pointed out here is that literally it takes seconds, is how in a second you can actually see years and years of work go down the drain and reputational damage, and the need to respond to this in a calculated fashion. You just underscored that very, very powerfully. So thank you, John, for that. We've got another 12 to 13 minutes more, and I've got a few more questions that have come in. One that, Adriana, I'm specifically going to bring to you because it puts a lot into perspective, and that is to do with the case of liability. In the event that something happens, for example, and I'll read this question verbatim, in the event that a firm, an enterprise that I, for example, am a board member of, has some malpractice from a cybersecurity perspective, what does this mean for the board? Are they in any case liable as overseers of those organizations? Do they hold any risk on their personal end? I know this has a lot to do with the terms and agreements, but how do you help enterprise with structuring their agreements on onboarding board members, if at all you do?
So unfortunately, I don't have too much information in that case because I don't work in that area. But I can talk from my personal experience being on boards. So board members usually have liability insurance. They do have a duty of care, so you have to be able to show that you did your due diligence, and you can't hide behind I was not aware of it these days anymore. So it's your duty of care that needs to be prevalent, because otherwise that liability insurance is not there to help you.
Yeah.
So I think it's changing the way the boards are looking at their role these days. They are not there just to be on the board. They have to make sure that they are doing their duties as well.
Absolutely. There's a follow-up question that's come to this, and Adriana, if you don't mind, I'll keep you on the hot seat for another few minutes. And that is how much is too much? And I'll reword this question a little bit. And that is to do, assume that you've got a board member who is someone like a John Pinard, extremely well-versed in cybersecurity, and an incident happens. And John now knows what has happened and can take a hands-on role. Do you recommend for board of directors now to start taking a little bit of a hands-on role in the event of an incident? Where do you draw the line, Adriana?
Well, I think that's what we were talking about, being prepared. So if you are being prepared and you have the roles and responsibilities very well outlined, then that's where you draw the line. You follow the book. You don't let people strain from that, because that's only going to derail you.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, we have people who are more cyber literate than others, so they might be asking. So their role is to make sure that they are asking the right questions as they go along, versus just at the time when an incident happens. And there are organizations that went through the incidents, and in some cases, board members are board members at multiple organizations, and they took that experience and used that in their next assignment on a board to ask those questions. So I think that's where the board members should focus on, how they ask the right questions ahead of time to ensure that the organization is prepared when something happens, on how to respond.
Forewarned is forearmed, as they say, and we've got another 8 minutes. So I'm going to race through the 3 questions that have come in. Thank you to the audience for sending this in. John, this one is directed at you, and I'll reword it just a little bit. And this has to do with, so for example, with me in working in the AI space, too much data is too little. I want to know more. I want more and more and more, so I can compute more and more and more. How do you decide what to share and what not to share? And sometimes you can overwhelm the board with a lot of information. And ultimately, if I'm at the board meeting, I'm going to be on Cyber Exchange chatting to other people as opposed to listening to you. So how do you determine, John, what to share and what not to share?
It's a good question, and it's really difficult in the sense that it depends on your audience.
Yeah.
I mean, when you're talking at the board level, as I said, I have tech savvy board members and I have non-tech savvy board members, and it's really a bit of a balancing act, but also they have a role within the organization as a board member. It's as a strategic role, not an operational role. And so to me, the big deciding factor is the information that I'm looking to share strategic or operational?
Yep.
And if it's operational, operational information can lead to strategic or have strategic impacts. As an example, an operational thing where we've been hacked, that's operational, but the implications of that hack is the strategic result of having to deal with stakeholders and the public and the government and so forth. So I think that's really what will drive what level of information you share. And it's not that you're trying to hide anything from them, but sometimes more information can just lead to confusion. And you're better off to give them the right level of information, which may not be all of the information.
Absolutely. And I think this is something which ties back to the dashboards and reporting templates. And I do advise those who are watching, and thank you for your questions, is if you do go to some of the links, there's an MNP group on Cyber Exchange, and you can get access to some resources or reach out to Adriana directly and look at what some of those dashboards look like, those reporting templates look like. Because not only do you have to decipher how much to share, but more importantly, you also have a very limited amount of time in which to put your reports together. And in the event of an incident, you kind of want to follow some of those templates to get to the point. If you're someone like me, you pretty much take an hour or two to get to the point, and by then the situation has escalated beyond your control. That said, Adriana, we've got a couple of more questions, and this one is one that I wish we would have spoken about separately as well, because it's truly interesting. In some board of directors, you tend to see that they create subcommittees. And they create a finance subcommittee, they create something else subcommittee, an HR subcommittee. Do you see cybersecurity falling into some of those subcommittee-like categories, or is the pedagogy for cyber completely different? Adriana?
I think the education has to happen for everybody. And cybersecurity, I think, should focus on technology risk. Like if the organization is, focus on technology where the risks are. So I don't know if you have to have a separate committee for that, but and I don't think that many do have cyber committees. But if they have risk committees, that's where the risk should be addressed. And you mentioned dashboards, so the information you provide to the board should always be linked back to risk. What are the key risk indicators? What are the key performance indicators about your program? And have pictures. Board members usually like picture, not a lot of writing that can tell a story. So I think linking cybersecurity to risk to the business, I think it's the right place to be.
And just sticking to that in terms of maintaining relevance and how do you structure your boards, can you comment a little bit about how you approach security and privacy matters separately as well? We know that they're not the same. We know that with privacy, there's a lot of legislation that comes to the table. You're a privacy engineer. Do you see them as two separate subjects, and how do you approach them at the board of directors level?
So I'm a big proponent of do not split them. You
Interesting.
cannot have security, you cannot have privacy without security, okay? So just talking, and I find in organizations, when they are siloed, they don't work. You have to have an integrated approach to protecting data, whatever that data is. And security is part of putting those protections in place. Privacy might be the one that sets the legal framework around the data, and obviously addresses some additional things. So you have to make sure you don't lose track of those things. You know, as you mentioned, AI. So how do you use data responsibly, ethically, which cybersecurity will not look, but there are intersections. So you have to ensure that the intersections actually happen. I was presenting at a conference in London a couple of years ago, and I was talking about this. How do you integrate these programs to make sure that you are successful? Because there are different regulatory requirements, and you might not think that there might be regulatory requirements, for example, for financial services. But if you look at the data, it's private information. So you can't address the financial regulation without the privacy.
Correct.
So when I talked to them and I said, you need to integrate these programs, the first question I got from the audience was, how do we talk to them? We never talk to them. So I said, well, pick up the phone and call them. You need to establish a relationship between these two groups. You can't operate a silo. That's not how you can address security and privacy in the future.
Absolutely, and you can't work in silos. Well said, Adriana. And now, because we've come close to the end of our time, I'm going to give John the opportunity to drop the mic, but I'm not going to make it easy for him. John, this question comes from me directly. I'm looking you in the eye. What was one thing that you learned today from Adriana that makes you go, these M&P folks know what they're talking about when it comes to security and the board? John, one thing.
I'm not sure that there is one thing. I do. One of the things that I will say that I'm going to reach out to Adriana on is some of these templates, and I need to be able to pull together sort of that playbook for our executives and our board, and that I think is one of the things for sure that if M&P's got some templates and things that can help to speed up that process, I will definitely be reaching out.
Fantastic. So
Anytime,
Adriana,
John.
Adriana, you've got connected to John, and of course to the wider community that's listening and watching. I hope that this first foray into the world of cybersecurity and the board and its shifts has given you a lot of interesting information. 60 odd minutes is definitely not enough to go through all of the complexities or go through specific case studies, but we hope in keeping in line with the pulse of the Power Hour, you gained something that gets you thinking about how well should I be engaging my board when it comes to cybersecurity. Adriana, John, as always, it's a pleasure. We had good fun, had a few laughs, and we all need that during these difficult times to bring a smile to people's faces. So thank you for making cybersecurity conversations accessible, enjoyable, and to a degree, entertaining. I'm going to ask you to stay on so that we can have a minute or two in the green room. But to our audience, again, I thank John, I thank Adriana, but I also thank our audience, the 60 odd people that joined. These sessions will also be available on demand. If you have any more questions, please reach out to both John and Adriana. And if there's one thing that I learned today is that M&P is putting forward a creative way to engage your boards, looking at tabletops, looking at new templates, looking at new discussion topics. And creativity doesn't wait for the right moment. You just go ahead and you get it done. Creativity is intelligence, is having fun. And I want you all to have fun in these sessions. And I hope that you enjoyed this conversation. And I look forward to seeing you at the very next Power Hour. In keeping in line with scripts, which I never do, but I have to do in this case, the team at CyberX has asked me to remind you that next week, programming will begin with a special session with Phelps Cybersecurity, looking at cybersecurity hiring for the C-suite. And I suspect you'll be seeing a couple of conversation lines from what we've spoken about today appearing there as well. After that, the team at Cyber Exchange mentions that they're going to be hosting the ISACA conference, as well as a couple of sessions leading up to Cyber Exchange 3.0, the Challenge Statement Edition. So I hope you'll all keep it at cyberexchange.ca. This is Ali Hirji signing off. Stay safe, stay healthy wherever you are, and stay cyber secure. I'll see you at the very next Power Hour, whenever that gets scheduled. Take care, stay well, cheers.